Hey, it's Andrew here at BTO Range in Conroe, Texas again. In today's little episode, we have probably one of the most common and most often seen 22 semi-automatic rifles from the 60s all the way through the 2000s. And this is the Marlin Model 60. Between this and the Ruger 1022, they're probably the most commonly seen 22 semi-automatics ever. This gun no longer in production. Of course, the 1022 is still rocking along rather nicely from Ruger. But this Marlin, with the demise of Marlin and the subsequent reorganization by Ruger, the Model 60 rifle has yet to be resurrected. Ruger has indicated that may be forthcoming, but it hasn't yet. They're still concentrating on the lever guns, and as well they should. But that said, there were millions of these guns, literally millions of these guns made over the long production history and in various different models. And it's good to discuss some of the history of this gun and some of the little idiosyncrasies and some of the things that can go wrong with it, and some of the things to look for when you're evaluating one of these guns on the used gun rack at your local gun shop. So the design started at Marlin with a designer by the name of Ewald Nicol, E-W-A-L-D, and then the last name Nicol, N-I-C-H-O-L, in 1959. And we see the gun really start coming out in 1960 as the Marlin Model 99. It was a walnut stock gun at that point in the Model 99, but it didn't take long for the mass merchandisers and the chain stores and whatnot to want a version, a little bit less expensive version for themselves. So Marlin introduced the same basic gun as the Marlin 60G, which would stand for Glenfield. Glenfield being not really a brand name because it said Marlin on the gun also, but Glenfield was a name that Marlin typically reserved for the mass merchandiser stores. It was the same basic action. There was no degradation to the components of the action and no design difference, but typically they would have had birch stocks instead of walnut, or some other little bit cheaper to manufacture components to allow them to sell at a lower price point than the walnut stock Marlin branded version. So in the Glenfield case, it was the birch stock and the less expensive sights then went on to the Marlin gun. But the Marlin 99 from 1960, they also had a Marlin 99 DL, which was the deluxe version, and that gun had a gold-colored trigger guard, gold trigger, nice wood, had the Marlin bullseye in the bottom. Now, these guns, the Glenfield guns or the birch stock guns, typically don't have that bullseye in the bottom, the Marlin bullseye that you find in the walnut stock guns, but the 99s did. And that gun, the 99 DL, ran from 1960 through 1964. They also introduced a 99C, which introduced a micro groove rifling in this particular model. That ran from 61 all the way to 1978, and that gun had the gold trigger too. Walnut stock gun, better sights, and these were made at the same time that the Glenfield line was being made also. So there were parallel guns with different stock materials, a little bit different sights, two different price points and two different merchandising points. So the earliest guns, the ones before 1964, so that'd be all the original 99s and the 99 DLs, were drilled and tapped on the top for a scope rail, which was packaged with the gun. After 64 is when Marlin went to the 3/8 groove, the 3/8 dovetail, integral to the aluminum receiver on the top of the rail, which is how it remained for all models throughout the rest of the production runs. The common 3/8 dovetail found on many 22 rimfires from almost all manufacturers at the time. So in 1970, all of the Marlin, virtually all the Marlin guns received a medallion inset into the stock, a 100th year medallion marking the 100th year anniversary of Marlin in 1970. So you can find that on 99Cs also. So there were other models of this basic receiver, this basic action was used in a bunch of different model numbers that differed in some design aspects and then some trim aspects. For example, the model 989 was this basic gun, the model 99 with a box magazine instead of the tube magazine here. And then we had the 99 M1, which was designed to look like an M1 carbine with an 18-inch barrel and a handguard. That was a tube magazine gun made from 64 through 78. And then the 99 M2, same gun with a box magazine made from 65 through 78. So 78, there was a change made in 1978 to where the walnut stock guns kind of went away, and then it became the model 990 and the model 995 in the Marlin line, and that was the sole walnut stock guns left in the 22 semi-auto line at that point forward. And then you had the Glenfield Marlin 60 line and the 70 and the 75. We'll talk about those here in just a minute. But in 1985, 1985 is when the action changed to accommodate a last round bolt hold open. It would have a bolt release here come sticking out of the bottom of the trigger guard at the bottom of the stock. So that's going to differentiate between what's called the old style and the new style in the Marlin 60 action, or any of the Marlin 22 actions. And at that point, there's a lot of the features or a lot of the parts of the gun that do not interchange. Over the course of its production, there were several design changes pertaining to the bolt, pertaining to obviously the changes necessary for that bolt hole open mechanism. There were changes made to the striker, not the striker, but the lifter spring and the feed throat, and then the magazine tube. There were either 5 or 6 different lengths of magazine tube for these tube-fed guns, depending on which model it was and depending upon year of production. So when it comes to finding a replacement for a lost magazine tube, it can be somewhat difficult because they're not being commercially remade by Marlin at this point. So you have to find either one that's available on the used market, or you have to have a gunsmith make one from magazine tube stock. And the magazine tube stock is available from companies like Brownells, or at least it used to be. Brownells is not the parts house that it used to be, but that can be made by a gunsmith. Now, again, the cost of that can be prohibitive depending upon what you're looking for. So that's something to watch out for on these Marlin rifles for sure. So in 85 is that switch over when we start to see those the bolt hole open. And how would you date the Marlin? Before the Gun Control Act of 68, a lot of these were not serialized, so they're kind of difficult to date at that point other than by the features. But once they started serializing the guns, up until about 1973, maybe 74, they used the year with the first 2 digits of the serial number. So you'd see a gun marked 72 and then 6 more digits. That'd be a 1972 gun. And around 74, and I'm not 100% sure it was 74, but it was certainly done by 76 because that's when this gun was made. To accurately date these rifles, you would take 2000 and subtract the first 2 digits of the serial number. So the first 2 digits of the serial number on this rifle is 24. So this would be a 1976 manufactured gun. So just a little interesting way to date these little Marlin 22s. So let's talk more about, one other model made from 68 to 78 was the Model 49. The Model 49 was the same basic action inside, except it had a 2-piece stock. There was an aluminum full receiver here instead of just a chassis, the half receiver basically, underneath the stock. So it was a full receiver with a 2-piece forearm and buttstock. The Model 49, the Model 49 DL for deluxe. Those were a special contract initially for a mass marketer chain that wanted something unique to them, but Marlin decided to go ahead and make it a standard catalog item, and it was no longer exclusive to that chain at that point. So In 1960, as we said, the Marlin 60G came about, and it ran under that name to 65, and then from 66 on, it became the Glenfield, and then well, to 82. And in around 83, Marlin dropped the Glenfield name for the most part. I think it may have resurfaced at some point, but after 83, it just became the Marlin Model 60. Still have the birch stock, still have the mass merchandiser features on it, but they just dropped the name Glenfield. So there were other models, the Model 70, which was this gun with a box magazine, the Model 75, which was the shorter stocked, almost the M1 version that you saw in the 99, but not quite. And then the Model 70 Papoose, which actually had a user detachable, easily detachable barrel with a barrel nut, kind of like a Charter AR-7 version that didn't float. So there are a ton of different versions of this gun. There are entire books. There's several pages in Brophy's book dedicated to the Marlin 22 rifle because there's just such a huge variation of them. Also, along that same line, there were a ton of these rifles produced with various medallions in the buttstock over the years, and that could be anywhere from an organization like an Elks Club or the NRA or somebody commissioning a special run of these rifles with a specific medallion, and there'll be a medallion inlaid into the stock there with various slogan or design or something. And some people are beginning to collect those, and I don't know really that there's a definitive list of how many variants of those there are. So it's something you can always be on the lookout for as to, gosh, well, I haven't seen that one, or I don't have that one. Another thing that Marlin, collectors may be a stretch, but I guess it's valid, is the impressed checkering pattern on some of these stocks differ. The earliest ones didn't have any impressed checkering, and then they started doing various different versions of this. And the one that we see referenced most often is called a squirrel pattern. And actually at the bottom of this checkering pattern on the pistol grip, there's a squirrel, the image of a squirrel impressed into that. And a lot of folks seek those out, and there's no difference in the gun. Those were early 70s guns, and there's actually several different variants of that animal checkering or that animal impression. There's a squirrel, there's a rabbit, there's a groundhog, and there are some that have some type of canine. I don't know if it's a coyote or if it's a wolf or what it's supposed to be, some kind of canine, and I'm not sure where that gun came from. I don't know if that was a specially commissioned run of a particular model for some entity. That I don't know. If you do know, drop a comment and let me know. That way I can educate myself further on this gun. So this gun is no longer in production, and most, or rather all, of the new parts of this gun have dried up. So any parts that are out there now are parts that have been cannibalized from older guns. And we've talked about that in several other videos. It's kind of a coin toss as to whether the part you get is going to be better than the part you have. So I'm going to take this gun out of the stock real quick and show you some of the part failures or potential part failures on this gun. And we just got this gun. Today is Monday, and the Saturday guys bought this gun over the counter along with a few other guns. So I haven't been in it yet. And so we're going to find out about this little gun together. So give me a second. Let me drop this gun out of the stock. Not functioning on all cylinders quite today. I went to a Gene Watson concert last night, and that put me out past my bedtime, which is sad, but it did. So notice I didn't take this screw out. This screw does not hold the action. It merely holds the front of this trigger guard in place. So now I'm going to go ahead and pull this action out as well. I didn't like the way that bolt didn't close. On the old style Marlin, you have 2 screws at the front of the trigger group. The new style does not. The new style has a pin that sticks out from the trigger group, and the trigger group has ears that index underneath the pin. There we go. And somebody's been in this gun at some point, which is never a good sign. I probably have to replace this screw. This screw in the back is a screw that goes into a post on the old style guns. On the new style, they're opposing screws. So you have to kind of hold this side to keep it from turning while you unscrew this. And then we can push this post out. That allows us to lift this out. So, okay. So here's the main guts of the trigger housing. And there are some things to pay attention to and some wear issues that we talk about. First is this polymer or this resin buffer. I'm not sure, it's made of some kind of nylon, but what happens to these buffers over time is they dry out and they basically disintegrate where they are. Now this part is being remade, and it's available from various sources, Gun Parts Corp, or you can find them on eBay or any number of places. And the gun will run without that buffer, but it serves as a limiter for the bolt's rearward motion to keep it from battering the inside of the receiver. So it really needs to be in play. Each of these, this particular unit comes apart like this. So the plate is secured by these E-clips on these pins. So you want to make sure that you can see E-clips on the pins where they're supposed to be. That way it gives you an indication that probably it hasn't been messed with very much. So aside from the buffer, the biggest problem we run into on these guns is this feed throat, this silver piece that you see here. On the tube magazine guns, the cartridge comes in from the magazine, then the lifter lifts it up and the bolt runs it forward across this ramp into the chamber. And this is a 2-piece zinc alloy casting that is sandwiched together right to left. And what happens over time is it begins to spread. It loses its integrity, if you will, and then that causes feeding problems with the rifle. So the problem is they're not being remade. There are some guns currently made with a similar action, made by CBC in Brazil, which would be the Mossberg 702 series, 715 series, and then the Rossi RS-22, but those are all box magazine guns and therefore do not have a feed throat. So you have to find these on the used market. There is a difference between the old style and the new style. If you have to replace, and there used to be a conversion. The conversion kit to go from the old style to the new style feed throat involved the feed throat, a new lifter, and a lifter spring. This is a tail of the lifter spring that on this 76 gun functions as the ejector. On the older guns, there was just a ledge basically on that side of the feed throat that was cast into the feed throat body itself that functioned as an ejector, and that's prone to crack out as well. So the problem is if the gun is not feeding well, and the first thing to do with any 22 obviously would be to clean it, make sure that the firing pin hasn't peened the chamber mouth from dry firing. But the bottom line is if you end up having to replace this feed throat, you're kind of at the mercy of what parts are available wherever you can find them to replace this feed throat with the correct old style feed throat. The new style feed throats have another indexing pillar right here. So they don't interchange. And again, whatever used part you get may not be as good as the part you have, or may be an equal problem. So if at all possible, you really would like to be able to test fire the gun. If you can't test fire these guns before you buy them, see if you can get them inexpensively enough to be able to sell them for parts if you need to. So that's always something to think about on these Marlin 60s. They're wonderful guns. They run for a long time until they don't. And hopefully, if Ruger gets the rifle back into production, they'll begin remanufacturing that conversion kit, because there are tons of these old guns out there that are sitting in closets somewhere not being used because they won't feed, because it's got a feed throat problem. So the other thing, if somebody would start MIM casting or whatever they have to do, this could be made out of aluminum instead of this zinc process, and it would be a better part. And you'd probably sell every one of them you make, but I don't know how much it would cost to tool up for that. So the difference between this and the new style housing is there would be a bolt hold open catch in this gun, and obviously it's not here, it's an old style gun. The other thing that we see quite a bit on these Marlins is, if you can see it, there is a bushing right here. That screw that goes through the front of the trigger guard screws into that bushing there. And when people take these guns apart, they believe that that front screw in the trigger guard is part of disassembling the rifle. They take it apart. As soon as you do that, this is not attached to the stock. That'll be loose. They subsequently lose this part, and then that screw, there's nothing to attach the screw to. So it's not uncommon to see these guns complete without that screw in there, and that can cause this to not be indexed correctly or not be positioned correctly in the stock, and then this trigger, the trigger may be out of line and cause you problems with disconnecting the sear. So that's the things to look out for on these Marlins. And we always talk about the three things we talk about with well, let me tell you what, there's actually more than that. So this is the magazine tube for this particular rifle. If the magazine follower is broken or bent, that's not the end of the world. These are actually being remade. It's just a matter of driving this pin out, and even the springs are being remade. They can be cut to length and a new follower put in. So if you have to replace the entire tube, that can be a bit problematic, because you have to have the length of the tube correctly. So you have to measure what length tube you need to be correct for the rifle, because neither too short nor too long, they will not work that way. The other thing to consider is this action spring right here. This spring that rides on this guide goes up into the back side of this bolt, and that's what powers the bolt front to rear. Chances are this gun from 1976, that's the spring that Marlin put in there in 1976, and it may still be fine. However, most of the time these need to be replaced, and that's not a big deal because those are being remade also. So that's not a hard part to get a hold of. The parts that are difficult are the magazine tube and this feed throat. The feed throat, realistically nowadays, unless you get lucky on the used part, the feed throat issue is kind of like a death sentence for these older Marlin rifles. So just be cognizant of that when you buy it. So if you are going to take one of these apart, and we'll do a gunsmithing video on the Marlin 60. We may even do it on this one, because this really could use a good cleaning and going through. There's a couple of tricky spots in here. As to the assembly, there are some small wire springs in there, and things can go flying if you don't pay attention to these E-clips, and if you don't capture this hammer spring before you start taking stuff apart. So we may do a gunsmithing video on that here in the very near future, or on another Marlin 60. So we talk about originality, scarcity, and condition, right? Scarcity, they're not. Now, having said that, certain submodels are scarcer than others, depending on if you're paying attention to the medallions in the stock, or there were some that had completely brass outer magazine tubes that were made for a chain store group in Oklahoma. So there are some small run versions of this gun that can be collectible, but even those guns aren't super expensive. So you could amass a pretty decent collection of all different unique variants of this model without spending a ton of money. And that's always attractive to me, is being able to collect something and learn about it and study about it without having to spend, you know, multiple hundreds or thousands of dollars for each successive unit. So scarcity, not so much. Originality, you know, really, you can't re-blue. This is aluminum. The aluminum receiver, the barrel's steel and pinned in here. You don't really see it. It's never been financially feasible to re-blue these guns. We'd have to pull the barrel out, blue that, and then do some kind of aluma black or Cerakote to that receiver. But what we do find people doing is spray painting. We just rattle can spray painting the whole dang thing. So not a huge fan of that. That's probably something you'd want to stay away from, because God knows what's under that paint. So, and then condition. This is typical condition for a gun from 1976, maybe a little bit better condition as far as metal finish go. We don't really see a ton of active rust on here, and that's always a good sign. It's been relatively well taken care of. You do see some scars and scratches here, and you can see that really light colored birch wood showing through that walnut stain. So that's typical finish. So what do you expect to pay for a Glenfield 60? And this is a Tasco silver antler scope, so it really doesn't bring any money to any real value to the equation, other than it makes it a little bit more shootable gun. So used to, I would buy these guns at retail. You'd see them for in the $89 range. But now, with a usable scope on it, you'd probably pay close to that $150 mark is where you're typically going to find these guns living. Some people ask more for it. If they get it, great. I've always said that, you know, a gun is worth exactly what somebody will pay for it, and if both parties are happy, then it's a good deal. But I think $150 is about all the money on one of these Model 60s, unless there's something rare or significant to it. So, like I said, there's a ton of different variants out there, and you can amass a pretty decent collection for not a whole big bunch of money invested in it. So the Marlin 60, that and again, along with the Ruger 1022, are probably the most quintessentially American 22 semi-auto rifles out there. And I know somebody's thinking, what about the Nylon 66? And yeah, I agree with you 100%. We're going to do as soon as I can get a hold of one, we're going to do a special video specifically on that Nylon 66 model, because it's a rather unique gun. But you see a lot more Marlin 60s than you do the Remington product anyway. So if you like what we're doing, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. We try to push as much content out as we can, at least on a weekly basis. Check out our other videos. I think we've got close to 60 of them up now, and still going strong. So, and we appreciate all the support and all the comments we've gotten so far. It means a lot to us. We really appreciate it. So have fun, watch those videos, and have a good day.